Climate Resilient Cities. Course content. Introduction to Climate Resilient Cities. Understanding urban vulnerabilities to climate change. Climate change impacts on urban infrastructure. Urban planning for climate resilience. Green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. Water management and flood resilience. Heat resilience and urban heat island mitigation. Energy systems and climate resilience. Social dimensions of urban climate resilience. Governance and policy frameworks. Financing climate resilient urban development. Technology and innovation in resilient cities. Case studies of climate resilient cities around the world. Roadmap for building climate resilient cities. Conclusion: the future of resilient urban living. Part 1. Introduction to climate resilient cities. The urban century. The 21st century is often described as the urban century. More than half of the world's population now resides in urban areas, a trend that is projected to continue in the coming decades. Cities have become the engines of economic growth, centers of innovation, and hubs of culture and governance. However, this rapid urbanization has brought with it a range of complex challenges, especially in the context of climate change. As climate-related risks intensify, cities face a dual challenge: reducing their own contributions to global warming while preparing for the inevitable impacts. From rising sea levels and extreme weather events to water scarcity and heatwaves, urban areas are increasingly vulnerable to the changing climate. The concept of climate resilience in cities has therefore gained prominence as a critical focus of sustainable development. Defining climate resilience in cities. Climate resilience refers to the capacity of urban systems, comprising people, infrastructure, institutions, and ecosystems, to survive, adapt, and thrive in the face of climate-related shocks and stresses. It involves not only physical robustness, but also social, economic, and institutional preparedness. A climate resilient city can anticipate and prepare for climate risks, absorb and recover from disruptions, adapt and transform to reduce future vulnerabilities. Resilience is not a static state, but a dynamic process of learning, innovation, and transformation. Why cities must be climate resilient. Urban areas are especially vulnerable to climate change due to high population density and concentration of assets, aging and often inadequate infrastructure, dependence on centralized systems, e.g. energy, water, exposure to natural hazards like floods, storms, and heatwaves. Climate-resilient cities can safeguard lives, protect economic assets, and ensure long-term prosperity. They are better equipped to handle emergencies, maintain essential services during crises, and recover quickly from disasters. Climate resilience versus climate mitigation and adaptation. While climate mitigation focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation aims to adjust systems to minimize harm, resilience encompasses both. It provides a broader framework that integrates mitigation, adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and sustainable development. Mitigation reduces the cause. Adaptation reduces the effect. Resilience ensures survival and thriving despite both. A resilient city may, for instance, adopt green energy mitigation, construct flood defenses adaptation, and build community networks that support vulnerable populations during disasters resilience. Global initiatives and the policy landscape. Several global initiatives and frameworks now emphasize the importance of climate resilience in urban development. The Paris Agreement 2015 recognizes cities as key actors in climate action. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015 to 2030 promotes resilience building. The New Urban Agenda 2016 encourages sustainable and inclusive urbanization. UN Sustainable Development Goals 11 Sudanese pounds aims to make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. These frameworks provide a policy foundation, but implementation depends on local governance, community engagement, and financial investments. The need for a holistic approach. Building climate resilience in cities is not just about engineering solutions. It requires a holistic approach that integrates urban planning and land use, ecosystem-based solutions, infrastructure and technology, economic diversification, social inclusion and community empowerment. The goal is not only to bounce back from climate shocks, but to bounce forward, creating better, more equitable, and more sustainable urban futures. Conclusion. Climate-resilient cities are the cornerstone of a sustainable and secure future in the face of climate change. As urbanization continues, cities must lead the way in developing innovative, inclusive, and adaptive solutions. This course will explore the dimensions, strategies, and real-world applications of building such resilience, laying out a roadmap for transforming urban centers into strongholds of sustainability and safety. Part 2. Understanding urban vulnerabilities to climate change. The urbanization climate nexus. Urbanization and climate change are deeply interconnected. As cities grow, their environmental footprints expand, consuming more energy, generating more waste, and altering local ecosystems. At the same time, their concentrated populations and infrastructure make them particularly vulnerable to climate-related hazards. Climate change acts as a threat multiplier, intensifying existing urban challenges such as housing shortages, inadequate infrastructure, and socioeconomic inequality. Identifying and understanding these vulnerabilities is the first step toward building climate-resilient cities. Types of urban vulnerabilities. Urban vulnerabilities to climate change can be broadly classified into three categories. 1. Physical vulnerabilities. These relate to the built environment and infrastructure, including poorly planned urban expansion in flood-prone or low-lying areas, inadequate drainage systems that exacerbate flood risks, aging transport, water, and energy infrastructure vulnerable to heat or storm damage, high-density construction that contributes to the urban heat island effect. 2. Social vulnerabilities. Social vulnerability refers to the degree to which communities are susceptible to harm due to socioeconomic status, access to resources, and institutional support. Key factors include poverty and inequality, limited access to healthcare and emergency services, marginalized groups such as the elderly, children, and people with disabilities, informal settlements often lacking basic infrastructure. 3. Economic vulnerabilities. Cities are economic powerhouses, but they are also highly exposed to disruptions. Climate-related economic vulnerabilities include damage to commercial districts and business continuity, disruption of supply chains and logistics, loss of productivity due to extreme heat or disasters, reduced tourism in climate-sensitive destinations, climate hazards facing urban areas. Urban regions are susceptible to a range of climate hazards. Heatwaves, rising temperatures, and the urban heat island effect can cause severe health impacts and strain energy systems. Flooding, heavy rainfall, riverine floods, and sea level rise threaten coastal and riverine cities. Storms and cyclones, high winds and storm surges can destroy infrastructure and displace populations. Droughts, water scarcity can affect sanitation, agriculture, and drinking water availability. Sea level rise poses an existential threat to low-lying coastal cities. Each city faces a unique combination of these hazards based on its geography, climate zone, and urban design. Mapping vulnerabilities, tools and techniques. Cities must assess and map vulnerabilities to prioritize action. Common tools include climate risk assessments combining hazard, exposure, and sensitivity data. Geographic Information Systems (GIS) for spatial analysis and hotspot identification. Urban climate models to simulate future risks. Participatory approaches, involving communities in mapping risks and assets. Data-driven vulnerability mapping supports evidence-based planning and investment. Interconnected risks and cascading failures. Urban vulnerabilities are often interconnected. A flood may not only damage roads but also disrupt power, water supply, and emergency services. These cascading failures can amplify the impacts of a single event. For example, a power outage during a heatwave may shut down cooling systems and hospitals. Flooded transport routes can hinder evacuation and delay emergency response. Planning for resilience requires a systems-thinking approach that recognizes these interdependencies. Vulnerability amplifiers, inequality and informality. Vulnerability is not evenly distributed. Poor and marginalized populations often live in high-risk areas, e.g., riverbanks, steep slopes. Lack access to early warning systems or insurance. Have limited savings or mobility during emergencies. Informal settlements, often ignored in official plans, are particularly vulnerable. Addressing inequality is not only a moral imperative, but a cornerstone of resilience. The role of governance in vulnerability. Weak institutions, fragmented governance, and lack of coordination across agencies can exacerbate vulnerabilities. Challenges include gaps between national and local policies, short-term planning horizons, limited technical and financial capacity at the municipal level. Strengthening urban governance is essential for reducing vulnerability and building long-term resilience. Conclusion: understanding urban vulnerabilities to climate change is essential for designing effective, equitable, and sustainable resilience strategies. Every city is unique, and so are its vulnerabilities. Recognizing physical, social, and economic dimensions and how they interact is the foundation for climate-resilient urban development. The next step is to address how these vulnerabilities manifest in infrastructure and systems, which we will explore in the next part. Part 3: Climate change impacts on urban infrastructure. The critical role of urban infrastructure. Urban infrastructure is the backbone of modern city life. It includes transportation systems, water supply and sanitation, energy grids, communication networks, housing and waste management. This interconnected web of services enables cities to function, grow, and support livelihoods. However, climate change poses unprecedented threats to these essential systems, placing cities at risk of widespread disruption. Climate hazards and their impact on infrastructure. Different climate hazards affect urban infrastructure in various ways. 1. Flooding. Transport disruption. Roads, bridges, and railways can be submerged or washed away. Damage to utilities. Water and sewage systems may overflow or become contaminated. Electricity outages. Substations and underground cables are vulnerable to floodwaters. Building damage. Prolonged water exposure weakens foundations and increases the risk of collapse. 2. Heatwaves. Stress on energy systems. Increased demand for cooling can overload power grids. Degradation of roads and rail. Asphalt can soften and rail tracks may warp. Water scarcity. Higher evaporation and consumption reduce water availability. Health risks. Overheated buildings and transport can endanger public health. 3. Sea level rise. Coastal erosion. Ports, sea walls, and coastal roads are at risk. Salinization. Saltwater intrusion can contaminate freshwater supplies and corrode infrastructure. Displacement. Permanent inundation of low-lying areas may render infrastructure unusable. 4. Storms and cyclones. Wind damage. High winds can destroy power lines, buildings, and telecom towers. Storm surges. Sudden flooding can overwhelm defenses and inundate cities. Debris and blockages. Fallen trees and structures disrupt mobility and emergency response. Cascading and systemic failures. Infrastructure is highly interdependent. The failure of one system can trigger a domino effect. A power outage can disable water pumps, paralyze transport, and shut down communication networks. Damaged roads can hinder the delivery of food, medical aid, and emergency services. Contaminated water supplies may lead to public health crises. These cascading failures magnify the impact of climate events and slow recovery efforts. Vulnerable infrastructure in informal settlements. Informal settlements, which often house a significant portion of the urban poor, typically lack durable construction, drainage and sanitation systems, reliable electricity and clean water. Climate events can easily wipe out such communities, which are frequently built on marginal lands like floodplains or hillsides. These areas are often excluded from formal infrastructure planning and investment. Urban infrastructure lifespan and climate compatibility. Most urban infrastructure is designed with assumptions based on historical climate data. However, as climate conditions change, this infrastructure may no longer perform as expected. Examples include stormwater drains sized for lower rainfall volumes, cooling systems built for milder temperatures, seawalls inadequate for projected sea level rise. There is an urgent need to future-proof infrastructure by integrating climate projections into planning, design, and maintenance. Resilience in infrastructure design. To withstand future climate stressor, cities must adopt climate-resilient infrastructure strategies. Green and blue infrastructure, parks, wetlands, and green roofs help absorb excess rainfall and reduce heat. Elevated and flexible designs. Roads, transit systems, and buildings elevated above flood levels. Redundancy and decentralization. Backup systems for water, energy, and transport ensure continuity. Smart infrastructure. Sensors and data analytics for real-time monitoring and rapid response. Retrofitting and adaptation. While new infrastructure can be climate resilient by design, existing systems often require retrofitting. Adaptation measures include reinforcing bridges and embankments, improving drainage and sewer systems, upgrading insulation and cooling in buildings, replacing vulnerable materials with resilient alternatives. Retrofitting is often more cost-effective than rebuilding after a disaster. Financing climate-resilient infrastructure. Infrastructure resilience requires significant investment. Cities can leverage public-private partnerships (PPPs), climate adaptation funds and green bonds, insurance and risk-sharing mechanisms, international development financing. Prioritizing resilience in infrastructure is not just a cost, it's a safeguard for long-term sustainability and economic security. Conclusion. Urban infrastructure lies at the heart of climate resilience. When infrastructure is vulnerable, so are the people who depend on it. As cities face increasingly severe climate risks, investing in resilient, adaptive, and inclusive infrastructure is both a necessity and an opportunity. The next part will explore how cities can embed resilience into urban planning and land use strategies to minimize climate vulnerabilities. Part 4. Urban planning for climate resilience. The role of urban planning in resilience. Urban planning shapes the physical, social, and economic fabric of a city. It determines where people live, how they move, and where infrastructure and natural resources are located. In the face of climate change, urban planning becomes a powerful tool for risk reduction, adaptation, and long-term resilience. Climate-resilient urban planning integrates climate risks into every aspect of city development, ensuring that growth does not exacerbate vulnerabilities, but instead enhances the city's ability to adapt and thrive. Principles of climate-resilient urban planning. Effective climate-resilient planning is based on several key principles. Risk-informed decision-making, understanding current and future climate risks and integrating them into land use and infrastructure planning. Integrated and cross-sectoral, coordinating across housing, transport, energy, water, and environment sectors. Inclusive and equitable, engaging communities, especially vulnerable groups, in the planning process. Flexibility and adaptability, designing plans that can adjust as climate conditions change. Nature-based solutions, leveraging ecosystems to provide protection and sustainability. Climate-sensitive land use planning. One of the most important levers of climate resilience is how land is used and zoned. Urban land use planning can avoid high-risk areas such as floodplains, steep slopes, or coastlines. Promote compact development to reduce infrastructure demand and protect natural buffers. Preserve and restore green spaces to manage stormwater and mitigate urban heat. Create mixed-use zones that reduce transportation emissions and enhance accessibility. Zoning regulations and building codes must be updated to reflect climate projections and hazard assessments. Compact, connected, and green cities. A resilient city is often described as compact, connected, and green. Compact reduces urban sprawl, limits ecological disruption, and makes services more accessible. Connected promotes efficient transportation and communication networks, including multiple routes and redundancy. Green integrates parks, forests, wetlands, and green infrastructure for climate adaptation and quality of life. These urban forms enhance efficiency while reducing exposure and vulnerability to climate impacts. Integrated planning tools and approaches. To plan for resilience, cities can utilize a range of tools and frameworks. Climate risk and vulnerability assessments to guide land use decisions. Geographic Information Systems (GIS) for mapping hazards, assets, and infrastructure. Scenario planning to anticipate different climate futures and test urban strategies. Urban resilience scorecards to assess gaps and monitor progress. These tools enable evidence-based planning and the alignment of development goals with climate resilience. Inclusion and community-based planning. Resilient planning must include the voices of those most affected. Participatory planning builds community trust and ensures plans reflect local needs. Identifies informal knowledge about climate risks and coping mechanisms. Encourages ownership of resilience initiatives and behavior change. Special efforts are needed to engage low-income populations, women, youth, indigenous communities, and people with disabilities who are often excluded from formal planning processes. Urban growth and climate adaptation. Many cities, especially in the Global South, are growing rapidly. Planning must guide this growth to prevent the proliferation of vulnerable informal settlements. Ensure access to climate-resilient infrastructure and services. Encourage climate-compatible housing and safe public spaces. Climate-resilient growth requires long-term vision, backed by strong institutions and legal frameworks. Disaster risk reduction in planning. Urban planning should be aligned with disaster risk reduction (DRR) strategies to limit exposure to natural hazards. Design evacuation routes and emergency infrastructure. Promote building regulations that withstand extreme events. Combining DRR with planning ensures cities are prepared for both slow onset and sudden climate events. Governance and institutional coordination. Urban resilience planning demands coordination across different government levels: national, regional, local. Multiple sectors: housing, water, health, environment. Stakeholders: citizens, businesses, academia, civil society. creating resilience units within city governments, and mainstreaming climate resilience into urban policies enhances institutional readiness and accountability. Conclusion: urban planning is a cornerstone of climate resilience. By anticipating risks, engaging communities, and shaping inclusive and adaptive environments, cities can reduce their vulnerability and enhance their ability to withstand and recover from climate shocks. The next part will explore how green infrastructure and nature-based solutions can be integrated into these plans to further strengthen resilience. Part 5: Green Infrastructure and Nature-Based Solutions. Reconnecting cities with nature. Urban development has often progressed at the expense of natural systems, paving over wetlands, replacing forests with buildings, and channeling rivers into concrete canals. This disconnection from nature has made cities more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Green infrastructure and nature-based solutions (NBS) offer a paradigm shift, reintegrating nature into urban environments to enhance resilience, improve livability, and deliver multiple environmental and social benefits. Defining green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. Green infrastructure refers to a network of natural and semi-natural systems that provide ecological functions and services, including parks, green roofs, rain gardens, street trees, urban forests, and wetlands. Nature-based solutions (NBS) are actions that work with and enhance nature to address societal challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and disaster risk. They are cost-effective, adaptive, and provide co-benefits. These approaches contrast with traditional grey infrastructure, e.g., concrete flood channels or storm drains, by mimicking natural processes rather than replacing them. Benefits of green infrastructure in cities. Green infrastructure delivers a wide range of resilience-related benefits. Stormwater management absorbs and filters rainfall, reducing flood risks. Temperature regulation. Trees and vegetation provide shade and cooling, reducing urban heat island effects. Air quality improvement. Vegetation filters pollutants and produces oxygen. Biodiversity support. Urban green spaces serve as habitats for flora and fauna. Well-being and health. Access to green spaces enhances physical and mental health. Carbon sequestration. Urban forests and green areas help capture atmospheric CO. Key components of urban green infrastructure. 1. Urban forests and street trees. Provide shade, intercept rainwater, and reduce energy use in buildings. Enhance aesthetic and recreational value. 2. Green roofs and green walls. Reduce building energy demand by improving insulation. Absorb rainwater and improve air quality. 3. Parks and open spaces. Offer flood storage, recharge groundwater, and support social interaction. Serve as emergency gathering areas during disasters. 4. Wetlands and bioswales. Natural water filters that control runoff, trap pollutants, and support biodiversity. 5. River restoration and riparian buffers. Reintroduce natural river flows, reduce flood risk, and prevent erosion. Nature-based solutions for flood and heat resilience. Flood resilience. Permeable surfaces and green corridors reduce surface runoff. Restored wetlands act as sponges during heavy rain events. Rain gardens in neighborhoods trap and filter rainwater. Heat resilience. Tree canopies and green corridors reduce surface and air temperatures. Reflective vegetation surfaces lower the need for mechanical cooling. Water bodies incorporated into public spaces moderate microclimates. Community-based green infrastructure. Engaging communities in the design, creation, and maintenance of green infrastructure enhances local ownership and stewardship, job creation and skills development, equity and access to green space. Community gardens, neighborhood greening programs, and urban agriculture are examples of grassroots NBS that promote both resilience and social cohesion. Policy and planning integration. For green infrastructure to be effective, it must be mainstreamed into urban planning and zoning regulations, supported by building codes and development incentives, monitored for performance and maintained over time. Cities can use green infrastructure plans, urban greening strategies and ecosystem service assessments to guide implementation. Financing nature-based solutions. NBS are often more cost-effective than grey infrastructure and provide higher returns over time. Funding options include green bonds and climate adaptation funds, public-private partnerships, payments for ecosystem services (PAYS), community financing and microgrants. Valuing ecosystem services can help justify investments in green infrastructure. Challenges and limitations. Despite their benefits, NBS face several challenges. Limited space in dense urban areas. Conflicts with land use priorities. Lack of technical capacity and awareness. Uncertain long-term maintenance funding. These can be addressed through strong policy support, innovative design, cross-sector collaboration, and community engagement. Conclusion. Green infrastructure and nature-based solutions are vital components of climate-resilient cities. They offer practical, cost-effective, and adaptive responses to urban climate challenges while delivering a host of co-benefits. By bringing nature back into cities, we not only mitigate climate risks, but also enhance the quality of urban life. The next part will explore the social dimensions of climate resilience, emphasizing the importance of equity, participation, and inclusion in building resilient urban futures. Part 6: Social Dimensions of Climate Resilience. The human face of climate change. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, it's a deeply social one. While its physical impacts are widely recognized, the social consequences, inequality, displacement, health risks, and livelihood losses, are often more profound. In urban areas, these impacts are not felt equally. Vulnerable and marginalized populations bear the brunt of climate hazards, making social resilience a critical pillar of climate-resilient cities. Understanding social vulnerability. Social vulnerability refers to the degree to which a population is susceptible to harm due to factors such as poverty, age, disability, gender, health status, or lack of access to resources and services. In cities, this often includes residents of informal settlements with poor infrastructure, low-income groups with limited adaptive capacity, elderly, children, and people with disabilities, migrant workers and displaced populations, women and gender minorities who may face systemic exclusion. These groups often live in high-risk zones, floodplains, slopes, or industrial areas, and lack the resources to prepare for, respond to, or recover from climate events. Equity in climate resilience planning. Climate justice demands that urban resilience strategies address systemic inequalities. Equity must be built into every stage of climate resilience planning. Procedural equity, ensuring inclusive participation in planning processes. Distributional equity, fair distribution of resources, infrastructure, and protection. Recognition equity, respecting the knowledge, rights, and priorities of marginalized communities. Cities should prioritize pro-poor climate interventions, target investments in underserved areas, and design inclusive policies that bridge social divides. Community engagement and participation. Resilient cities are built with communities, not just for them. Engaging residents, especially vulnerable populations, in resilience planning enhances local knowledge and relevance of interventions. Trust and transparency in governance. Community capacity to respond to emergencies. Ownership and long-term sustainability of projects. Tools such as participatory mapping, community-based vulnerability assessments, and citizen science platforms empower residents to contribute meaningfully. Social capital and networks. Social capital, the networks of relationships and trust among people, is a key resilience asset. Communities with strong social cohesion recover faster from disasters and adapt more effectively to change. Urban policies should promote support networks and cooperatives. Local leadership development. Resilience hubs and safe gathering spaces. Education and awareness programs. Social resilience complements physical resilience, especially when formal systems fail or are overwhelmed. Health, housing and livelihoods. 3 essential social pillars of climate resilience are: 1. Public health. Climate change increases risks of vector-borne diseases, heat stress, respiratory issues and mental health challenges. Cities need climate-informed health systems, early warning systems and accessible healthcare for vulnerable populations. 2. Affordable and resilient housing. Millions live in unsafe housing, especially in informal settlements. Cities must invest in upgrading, retrofitting, and relocating where necessary, while protecting tenure rights and avoiding forced evictions. 3. Climate-resilient livelihoods. Many urban poor work in the informal economy, lacking job security or social protection. Resilience strategies must include skills training, green jobs programs, and financial inclusion to build adaptive capacity. Gender and climate resilience. Women often face disproportionate climate risks due to social roles, care responsibilities, and limited access to resources. However, they are also powerful agents of resilience. Climate policies must be gender-sensitive, recognizing different needs and capabilities. Women should be represented in decision-making bodies. Programs should support women-led adaptation initiatives and address issues like gender-based violence during climate crises. Migration and displacement. Climate-induced migration is becoming a reality for many urban regions. Cities must be prepared to accommodate incoming populations displaced by rural climate impacts or disasters. Support internally displaced people (IDPs) within cities. Integrate migrants into housing, employment, and services. Promote social cohesion and avoid xenophobia. Inclusive urban planning that anticipates migration flows is essential for long-term resilience. Education, awareness, and capacity building. Resilient communities are informed and empowered. Education and outreach efforts should focus on climate literacy in schools and public campaigns. Risk awareness and emergency preparedness training. Community-based early warning systems. Capacity building for local leaders and civil society groups. Behavioral change and social mobilization are key enablers of resilience. Conclusion. Social resilience is the heart of a climate-resilient city. Without addressing inequality, exclusion, and vulnerability, physical and environmental resilience measures will fall short. Building inclusive, equitable, and empowered urban societies ensures that cities are not only able to withstand climate shocks, but also thrive in the face of uncertainty. In the next part, we'll explore policy, governance, and institutional frameworks that support the development of climate-resilient cities. Part 7: Policy, Governance, and Institutional Frameworks. The importance of governance in climate resilience. Building climate-resilient cities is as much a governance challenge as it is a technical one. Without the right policies, institutional frameworks, and leadership, even the best strategies and technologies may fail. Effective governance ensures coordination across sectors and agencies, participation of stakeholders, long-term vision and continuity, efficient use of resources, transparency and accountability. Resilient cities are underpinned by strong institutions capable of making informed decisions, managing risks, and responding to climate-related events. National policy and legal frameworks. National governments play a critical role by creating enabling environments for urban resilience through climate change policies and strategies, e.g., nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. Urban development policies that mainstream resilience. Disaster risk reduction (DRR) laws and plans. Decentralization laws that empower local governments. Alignment between climate policies and urban policies helps avoid fragmented responses and promotes synergy. Local governance and institutional capacity. Local governments are at the front lines of climate action. They are responsible for land use planning, service delivery, infrastructure development, and emergency response. To fulfill this role effectively, cities need clear mandates for climate resilience, dedicated departments or resilience units, capacity building and training for staff, stable financial resources. Institutional fragmentation and limited technical know-how are common barriers that must be addressed through targeted support. Multi-level and cross-sectoral governance. Resilience planning requires coordination across levels of government: national, regional, metropolitan, and municipal sectors: water, transport, housing, energy, health, environment, and more. Stakeholders: civil society, academia, private sector, and communities. Integrated governance mechanisms, such as interagency committees or climate task forces, help harmonize actions and avoid duplication. Metropolitan governance bodies are especially useful in large urban regions with overlapping jurisdictions. Policy instruments for climate resilience. A range of policy tools can support urban climate resilience. Zoning and land use regulations to prevent development in hazard-prone areas. Building codes and design standards to ensure climate-resilient construction. Environmental regulations to protect natural buffers and ecosystems. Development control and permitting to steer growth responsibly. Incentives and subsidies to encourage green building and retrofitting. These instruments must be informed by climate data and vulnerability assessments to be effective. Participatory and transparent governance. Transparency and participation are critical for building trust between governments and citizens, harnessing local knowledge and ensuring relevance, promoting accountability and reducing corruption. Cities should adopt open data policies, publish climate risk assessments, and create platforms for public input. Participatory budgeting and community-led planning initiatives are powerful tools for inclusive resilience. Financing urban climate resilience. Policy must address the question of how to pay for climate resilience. Key approaches include municipal finance reforms to increase revenue from property taxes and service fees. Accessing climate funds such as the Green Climate Fund or Adaptation Fund. Blended finance involving public, private, and philanthropic capital. Risk transfer mechanisms like insurance and catastrophe bonds. Climate budgeting and mainstreaming resilience into investment planning. Cities need financial autonomy and capacity to manage these mechanisms effectively. Data monitoring and accountability. Evidence-based decision-making is essential. Governance systems should ensure regular data collection on climate risks, infrastructure, and social vulnerability. Monitoring and evaluation frameworks for resilience programs. Climate indicators and performance metrics. Public dashboards and reporting systems. Data should be disaggregated and accessible to inform equitable and adaptive policy responses. Legal empowerment and rights-based approaches. Resilience governance must protect and empower citizens, especially the most vulnerable. Legal frameworks should recognize housing and land rights, uphold environmental justice, Ensure grievance redress mechanisms. Protect the rights of displaced and marginalized communities. A rights-based approach ensures that resilience does not come at the cost of social justice. Conclusion. Strong policy and governance frameworks are the backbone of climate-resilient cities. By aligning policies across levels, empowering institutions, fostering participation, and ensuring accountability, cities can create the conditions necessary for systemic and sustained resilience. The next part will examine the role of technology and innovation in advancing urban climate resilience. Part 8. Technology and innovation for resilient cities. The role of innovation in climate resilience. In the face of rapidly evolving climate risks, cities must go beyond traditional responses and embrace technological innovation as a core component of resilience. From smart infrastructure to real-time monitoring systems, technology enables cities to anticipate, adapt to, and recover from climate-related shocks more effectively. Innovation also provides tools for inclusive governance, data-driven planning, and efficient resource management, making urban resilience smarter, faster, and more responsive. Smart city technologies and climate adaptation. Smart city technologies leverage information and communication technologies, ICT, to improve urban services. For climate resilience, these technologies can support smart grids for managing energy demand and integrating renewables, IoT-based water systems for detecting leaks and optimizing distribution, climate-sensitive traffic and mobility systems to reduce emissions, early warning systems using sensors and real-time data, digital twin models for scenario planning and infrastructure design. These tools help cities reduce their environmental footprint while increasing preparedness and adaptability. Data and analytics for decision-making. Resilient cities rely on accurate, timely, and accessible data. Data analytics support climate risk mapping and vulnerability assessment, real-time monitoring of weather, air quality, and water levels, predictive modeling for floods, heatwaves, and other climate events, performance tracking of resilience strategies. Open data platforms and geospatial tools like GIS enable better transparency and coordination across departments and stakeholders. Internet of Things (IoT) for urban resilience. The IoT connects devices, sensors, and infrastructure in real time, enhancing the responsiveness of cities to climate risks. Examples include smart flood sensors in drainage systems, air quality sensors for pollution management, smart bins that optimize waste collection, greenhouse monitoring for urban agriculture. IoT networks generate valuable data for both crisis response and long-term planning. Artificial intelligence and machine learning. AI and machine learning enhance resilience through predictive analytics for extreme weather patterns, automated emergency response systems, urban climate modeling and simulations, AI-driven energy management systems. AI can optimize complex urban systems and help cities act faster in emergencies or identify long-term adaptation pathways. Renewable energy and microgrids. Energy resilience is vital for climate-resilient cities. Technological innovations in this area include solar panels and solar rooftops integrated with smart grids, microgrids and battery storage systems for energy independence, energy-efficient appliances and smart meters. Resilient energy systems reduce greenhouse gas emissions and keep critical services running during outages. Nature tech, innovations inspired by nature. Nature-based technology or nature tech blends ecological systems with innovation. Examples include green walls and roofs with integrated irrigation and monitoring, permeable pavement for water absorption and flood control, Biomimicry in design, inspired by natural processes. Sensor-equipped urban wetlands for water filtration and biodiversity tracking. These innovations enhance ecosystem services, while integrating seamlessly into urban life. Digital participation and e-governance. Technology enables more inclusive governance through tools such as mobile apps for citizen reporting on flooding or infrastructure damage, e-consultations and digital participatory planning, crowdsourcing platforms for urban innovation, resilience dashboards for transparency and public awareness. These tools democratize data, improve accountability, and build stronger connections between governments and citizens. Barriers to technological adoption. Despite the promise, technology adoption in cities faces challenges. High upfront costs and limited funding. Digital divides between rich and poor, connected and unconnected. Data privacy and cybersecurity concerns. Lack of technical capacity within local governments. Fragmented systems and lack of interoperability. Addressing these requires investment in digital literacy, inclusive planning, and strategic partnerships. Conclusion. Technology and innovation are not silver bullets, but they are powerful enablers of urban climate resilience. When integrated with strong governance, community participation, and ecological awareness, technological solutions can transform how cities prepare for and respond to climate challenges. The next part will explore how urban design and infrastructure can be reimagined for climate resilience. Part 9. Climate-responsive urban design and infrastructure. Introduction: the built environment and climate risks. Urban design and infrastructure define the physical form and function of cities. As climate change intensifies, these physical systems are under increasing threat from floods, heatwaves, droughts, and storms. Climate-responsive urban design rethinks how cities are built and organized to withstand, adapt to, and recover from such impacts. A city's resilience is shaped not only by what it builds, but also how and where it builds. Principles of climate-responsive design. Climate-responsive design considers environmental conditions and integrates climate adaptation into the physical planning of urban spaces. Core principles include flexibility, designing systems that can adapt to changing climate conditions. Redundancy, creating backup systems for critical infrastructure. Modularity, breaking large systems into smaller, manageable components. Connectivity, ensuring access and mobility during disruptions. Ecosystem integration, using nature-based solutions for resilience. These principles guide both new developments and retrofitting of existing infrastructure. Urban heat and cool cities design. Urban areas are especially vulnerable to the urban heat island (UHI) effect, where built environments trap heat. Climate-responsive designs to combat UHI include green roofs and walls, high albedo materials for pavements and rooftops, tree-lined streets and urban forests, water features that cool microclimates, compact mixed-use zoning to reduce vehicular emissions. Designs must prioritize thermal comfort, especially in low-income neighborhoods. Flood-resilient urban planning. With rising sea levels and extreme rainfall, flood resilience is essential. Strategies include blue-green infrastructure, integrating water bodies and vegetation to absorb runoff. Permeable pavements, enabling water infiltration. Rain gardens and bioswales, managing stormwater naturally. Raised or floating housing in flood-prone areas. Protective levees and seawalls where appropriate. Urban planning must avoid development in high-risk flood zones and promote water-sensitive layouts. Climate-resilient transport infrastructure. Transport systems must remain functional during extreme weather events. Resilient transport design includes elevated roads and railways in flood zones. Stormwater drainage integrated into transit corridors. multimodal systems for redundancy, green corridors and bike lanes for low-carbon mobility, real-time alerts and smart traffic systems for emergency response. Climate-proofing transport ensures continuity of movement and access to essential services. Energy and water infrastructure. Resilient energy and water systems support urban functioning during climate events. Decentralized energy systems, e.g., solar microgrids. Underground cabling to reduce storm damage. Smart water meters to detect leaks and manage consumption. Water recycling and rainwater harvesting. Dual-use infrastructure, e.g., roads doubling as stormwater channels. Resilience here also reduces operational costs and improves service delivery. Housing and shelter for a changing climate. Resilient housing must be structurally sound to withstand climate stresses, thermally efficient for cooling and insulation, affordable and inclusive, expandable or modular for changing needs. In informal settlements, upgrading projects should focus on drainage and sanitation, structural retrofitting, legal tenure and community involvement. Temporary shelters for displaced populations must also meet climate-resilient standards. Urban green and blue spaces. Green and blue infrastructure refers to parks, rivers, lakes, wetlands, and vegetated areas that provide ecosystem services and enhance urban resilience. Benefits include flood mitigation, cooling effects, air purification, recreation and mental well-being. Designing connected networks of green and blue spaces also supports urban biodiversity and disaster buffers. Infrastructure for emergency preparedness. Cities must plan for crises. Infrastructure for emergency preparedness includes resilience hubs and community shelters, evacuation routes and signage, backup power and water supplies, early warning systems integrated with telecom and broadcast, healthcare infrastructure with surge capacity. Infrastructure must be accessible to all, including vulnerable populations. Integrating climate resilience in urban planning processes. Resilient design must be embedded in zoning and land use regulations, building codes and standards, infrastructure master plans, environmental impact assessments, public-private partnerships for resilient construction. Urban planners must work across departments and with stakeholders to mainstream resilience into every layer of design and implementation. Conclusion. Climate-responsive urban design is a cornerstone of resilient cities. By rethinking infrastructure through a climate lens, cities can protect their populations, enhance livability, and reduce long-term costs. The future of urban development lies not just in what we build, but in how we build, sustainably, inclusively, and with climate in mind. The next part will explore community-based approaches to enhancing resilience at the grassroots level. Part 10. Community-based approaches to urban resilience. Introduction: the power of local action. While infrastructure, technology, and policy are vital, true urban resilience is incomplete without community participation. Communities are the first responders during climate shocks and the long-term stewards of local adaptation efforts. Community-based approaches focus on empowering people, recognizing local knowledge, and promoting inclusive decision-making to build resilience from the ground up. Why community involvement matters. Community involvement enhances resilience by increasing awareness of climate risks and actions, mobilizing local resources and networks, ensuring solutions are culturally and contextually appropriate, promoting equity and inclusion, especially for marginalized groups, building trust and social cohesion. Top-down approaches often miss the lived realities of urban residents. Community-based strategies bridge this gap. Participatory planning and co-design. Participatory planning involves residents in shaping their neighborhoods. Key tools include community mapping to identify risks and resources, workshops and town halls for idea sharing and visioning, design charrettes involving local architects and citizens, participatory budgeting for resilience initiatives. Such processes ensure that interventions align with local priorities and build ownership. Community-led risk assessment. Communities can play a central role in identifying, analyzing, and mapping risks, especially in informal settlements where official data may be limited. Tools include vulnerability assessments, hazard identification and historical event tracking, community-level climate scenario building, citizen science for data collection. These assessments enable proactive planning and help target limited resources effectively. Building social capital and resilience networks. Social capital, trust networks and shared norms, enhances collective capacity to respond to crises. Cities can support this through neighborhood resilience groups, resident associations and community watch programs, faith-based and cultural organizations, intergenerational knowledge sharing. Strong community networks often outperform formal institutions during emergencies. Empowering vulnerable and marginalized groups. Women, children, the elderly, migrants and people with disabilities often face disproportionate risks. Resilience planning must ensure representation in decision-making bodies, address specific vulnerabilities through targeted support, protect housing and land tenure rights, provide capacity building and livelihood training. Empowerment leads to stronger, more equitable resilience outcomes. Education and climate awareness campaigns. Raising awareness is a cornerstone of community resilience. Strategies include school-based climate education, public campaigns through radio, social media, and street theater, training for local leaders and volunteers, climate literacy programs tailored to different groups. Education fosters a culture of preparedness and encourages long-term behavior change. Community-based disaster preparedness. Preparedness at the community level involves local disaster response plans, mock drills and simulations, community emergency response teams (CERTs), stockpiling emergency kits and supplies, early warning systems linked to mobile alerts. These measures reduce response time and save lives during actual emergencies. Community stewardship of natural resources. Communities play a crucial role in maintaining urban ecosystems. Examples of community stewardship include managing local parks and green spaces, maintaining urban gardens and rainwater harvesting systems, restoring mangroves or wetlands, participating in cleanup and greening drives. When residents are stewards of their environment, resilience becomes a shared responsibility. Supporting grassroots innovation. Many resilience solutions emerge from the ground up. Cities can nurture this by providing microgrants for local initiatives, creating maker spaces or resilience innovation hubs, connecting community groups with technical experts, recognizing and scaling successful local practices. Innovation is not limited to high-tech labs. It's found in the creativity of everyday problem solvers. Partnerships between communities and institutions. Effective resilience requires collaboration between community groups, NGOs, academic institutions, and local governments. Key elements include clear roles and communication channels, memorandums of understanding, MOUs, joint monitoring and accountability mechanisms, shared data and knowledge platforms, These partnerships foster trust, ensure sustainability, and bridge capacity gaps. Conclusion: community-based approaches place people at the heart of urban resilience. By involving, empowering, and supporting communities, cities can build adaptive capacity, foster equity, and ensure that resilience is sustainable and inclusive. Resilient cities are not built only with concrete and codes, they are built with collective will and community spirit. In the next part, we will explore financing urban climate resilience, including funding sources, strategies, and financial tools for sustainable implementation. Part 11: Financing Urban Climate Resilience. Introduction: The cost of resilience. Building climate-resilient cities requires significant investment in infrastructure, planning, technology, and community capacity. While the costs of resilience can be high, the costs of inaction, in terms of economic losses, displacement, and human suffering, are even greater. Financing urban resilience is therefore not just a necessity, but a strategic investment in the future of cities. Understanding the financial landscape. Urban resilience financing involves multiple actors: local and national governments, international donors and development banks, private sector investors, philanthropic organizations, communities, and individuals. Each actor plays a unique role in contributing to or leveraging financial resources for climate adaptation and risk reduction. Public financing and budgeting for resilience. Governments remain the principal financiers of resilience projects. Tools include dedicated climate resilience budgets in city planning, green public procurement to promote sustainable construction, intergovernmental transfers and fiscal incentives, mainstreaming climate resilience into all capital and infrastructure planning. Budget transparency and impact assessments help ensure that funds are used effectively and equitably. International climate finance and donor support. Cities can tap into international climate finance through mechanisms such as Green Climate Fund (GCF), Global Environment Facility (GEF), Adaptation Fund, World Bank's Urban Resilience Program, bilateral aid agencies e.g. USAID, GIZ, DFID. However, accessing these funds requires strong project design, data, and reporting capacity, which many cities lack. Leveraging private sector investment. Private finance is crucial for scaling resilience. Strategies to attract private investment include public-private partnerships (PPPs), green bonds and resilience bonds, insurance-linked securities, credit guarantees and risk-sharing mechanisms, climate disclosure and ESG alignment. Cities must create enabling environments for investment through clear regulations, de-risking instruments, and bankable projects. Innovative financial instruments. New financial tools are emerging to support resilience, such as green and climate bonds, capital raise for environmental or adaptation projects, resilience bonds, linked to performance in reducing disaster risks, catastrophe bonds, provide payouts when disasters strike, pay-for-success models, outcomes-based financing, climate risk insurance schemes, especially for low-income and vulnerable communities. These instruments help diversify funding and reduce exposure to climate-related losses. Insurance and risk transfer mechanisms. Insurance plays a vital role in managing and transferring climate risks. Urban applications include parametric insurance based on predefined weather triggers, property insurance for flood and storm damage, crop and livelihood insurance in peri-urban areas, community-based insurance pools. Insurance mechanisms must be affordable, accessible, and aligned with broader resilience goals. Role of local revenue and fiscal autonomy. Cities must strengthen their own revenue-generating capacity through Local taxes and user fees, e.g., congestion pricing, solid waste charges. Land value capture and development fees. Municipal bonds. Carbon pricing and local climate levies. Fiscal autonomy enhances city control over resilience planning and implementation. Blended finance approaches. Blended finance combines public and private capital to lower investment risks and unlock larger funding flows. It involves concessional loans and grants used to attract commercial finance, technical assistance for project preparation, multi-stakeholder partnerships. Blended finance is particularly useful for large-scale infrastructure and nature-based solutions. Community-based finance models. Empowering communities through financial tools can enhance local resilience. These models include community savings groups and cooperatives, resilience microfinance for housing or livelihoods, participatory budgeting for neighborhood projects, crowdfunding platforms for local initiatives. These approaches build local ownership and ensure that solutions are inclusive and need-driven. Challenges in financing urban resilience. Key barriers to resilience financing include lack of project pipelines and bankability, fragmented governance and coordination, insufficient data and risk assessments, capacity gaps in financial planning and management, short political cycles versus long-term resilience planning. Addressing these requires investment in institutional capacity, partnerships and technical support. Conclusion. Financing urban climate resilience is both a challenge and an opportunity. By combining innovative instruments, strong governance and inclusive financing models, cities can unlock the capital needed to safeguard their future. A resilient city is not only prepared for climate risks, it is also economically viable, socially equitable and financially sustainable. In the final part, we will explore case studies of climate-resilient cities around the world, showcasing practical examples and lessons learned. Part 12. Case studies of climate-resilient cities around the world. Introduction. Case studies provide real-world insights into how cities are tackling the challenges of climate change. From innovative infrastructure to community-led initiatives, these examples highlight diverse strategies tailored to local contexts. This part examines successful urban resilience efforts across a variety of geographies, scales, and socio-economic conditions. Rotterdam, Netherlands, living with water. Challenge: flooding and sea level rise strategy, integrated water management and spatial planning. Rotterdam has reimagined itself as a climate-resilient delta city through water squares that serve as public spaces and rainwater catchments. Green Roofs program, incentivizing sustainable buildings. Marvlukte 2 expansion with natural storm surge barriers. Rotterdam Climate Initiative, uniting public, private and civic sectors. The city's philosophy is to live with water, not fight it, blending engineering with landscape architecture. Medellin, Colombia, urban transformation through equity. Challenge: social vulnerability and landslide risks strategy, inclusive urban redevelopment and mobility. Medellin turned around its reputation through integrated transportation systems like the Metrosable, cable cars for hilly areas. Green corridors for cooling and recreation. Risk reduction housing upgrades in informal settlements. Community participation in planning. These interventions addressed both climate resilience and social inclusion, reducing crime and improving urban health. Surat, India, institutionalizing urban resilience. Challenge: flooding and water scarcity strategy, multi-stakeholder governance and data-driven planning. Surat, part of the Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network (ACCCRN), has created the Surat Climate Change Trust (SCCT), used climate vulnerability assessments to guide action, developed early warning systems, and flood mitigation infrastructure. Upgraded stormwater drainage and wastewater reuse. By embedding resilience into city governance, Surat has become a model for second-tier cities in South Asia. New York City, USA, rebuilding for a resilient future. Challenge: Hurricane Sandy and sea level rise strategy, resilient infrastructure and policy reform. Post-Sandy, NYC adopted PLA-NYC and later 1NYC, emphasizing the Big U project, protective berms and greenways around Manhattan. Climate resiliency design guidelines for infrastructure. Retrofitting public housing with energy-efficient, flood-resilient designs. Climate risk mapping and zoning reform. New York's approach is characterized by data, design and decentralization, with a focus on future-proofing the city. Kigali, Rwanda, green growth in an African context. Challenge: urban growth and erosion strategy, ecosystem restoration and planned urban expansion. Kigali's resilience efforts include master planning for compact, walkable urban form, wetland protection and rehabilitation to manage flooding, affordable greenhousing through PPPs, national green growth and climate resilience strategy. Kigali illustrates how low-income countries can lead with innovation, integrating ecology and equity in development. Melbourne, Australia, urban cooling and biodiversity. Challenge: heatwaves and drought strategy, greening the city for resilience and livability. Melbourne's urban forest strategy aims to double canopy cover to reduce urban heat. Use permeable pavements and stormwater harvesting. Engage residents in citizen tree care. Support biodiversity through habitat corridors. The city's cooling strategy improves public health, reduces energy use and strengthens urban ecosystems. Bangkok, Thailand, sponge city solutions. Challenge: flash floods and waterlogging strategy, nature-based drainage and urban design. Bangkok is implementing sponge city solutions through Chulalongkorn University Centenary Park, a tilted park that captures and filters stormwater. Canal revitalization for drainage and recreation. Urban farming on rooftops to manage runoff. Community-based flood monitoring. These designs blend engineering, culture, and ecology to cope with growing flood risks. Copenhagen, Denmark, climate-proofing through design. Challenge: cloudbursts and urban flooding strategy, blue-green infrastructure and co-benefits. Copenhagen's cloudburst management plan features streets that double as flood channels, parks and plazas designed for water storage, sustainable urban drainage systems (SUDS), stakeholder-driven design processes. The city's climate adaptation is deeply integrated into its urban design ethos, enhancing both functionality and beauty. Key lessons from the case studies. Across these diverse cities, several common success factors emerge: strong political leadership and institutional continuity, multi-sectoral collaboration among government, private, and civil society, integration of data and risk assessments into planning, community participation to ensure equity and effectiveness, blending gray and green infrastructure, mainstreaming climate into everyday governance. No single model fits all, but shared principles of flexibility, inclusiveness, and foresight are universal. Conclusion: toward a resilient urban future. The journey toward climate-resilient cities is complex and ongoing. As the impacts of climate change intensify, cities must continue to learn, adapt, and innovate. The case studies in this part show that resilience is not a distant ideal. It is already being built today in small neighborhoods and large metros alike. The future of cities depends on our ability to combine visionary planning, grounded action, and inclusive governance. With the right tools, resources, and partnerships, climate-resilient cities are not just possible, they are inevitable.